Hello and welcome. I'm Patrick Curtis, your host and chief monkey, and this is the Wall Street Oasis podcast. Join me as I talk to some of the community's most successful and inspirational members to gain valuable insight into different career paths and life in general. Let's get to it. In this episode, banker turned drink maker shares his path from Arizona State to breaking into a bulge bracket investment bank, how he navigated coming from a non-target school, how he prepped for his interviews, how he networked, and lessons learned along the way. Don't miss this one. There's some great insight. Enjoy. Banker turned drink maker. Thanks for joining the Wall Street Oasis podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited. I've been following your site and you for a long time, so excited to chat today.
Awesome. So it'd be great if you could just give the listeners a quick summary of your bio.
Yeah, definitely. So I started a state school, and my bio here right now still says anonymous, but I do want to say, just so the listeners kind of have an idea of what I'm talking about. I was at Arizona State, all the way over on the West Coast, and I decided I wanted to go into investment banking, and I wanted to go into New York. So networked my way out there, hundreds of emails and calls. We can go more into detail on that. But eventually ended up with a full-time offer there. Did not intern in the city, so flipped straight to full-time investment banking at a Bulge bracket. Did about 3 years there, and then jumped into a growth equity shop, really doing Series A checks. Having left there after my 2-year associate program, I'm now working on my own startup idea, which is kind of the joke behind this anonymous tagline here. Is I'm working on a drink company right now on the side, while I also consult some startups doing some outsourced CFO work. So that's what I've been up to.
Very cool. So let's start all the way back at Arizona. Arizona State, right?
That's correct.
Yes. So you were there for 4 years. When you kind of figured out you wanted to be an investment banker, when was that? Like freshman year, sophomore year, or late?
A little bit later. So I came in knowing I wanted to be a finance major, and being kind of a driven type A personality, wanted to do something in finance that was challenging. So yeah, freshman year, you kind of hear about investment banking at a small state school with no parental connection to finance. It wasn't the first thing I thought of. So kind of go through, the standard motions freshman year. And then sophomore year, I studied abroad. So then I'm coming back, or it was just a semester abroad, but you kind of lose a little bit of a recruiting cycle there. So I come back junior year, and I wanted investment banking fully. And there was a club on campus that helped students like me, and prepping for interviews and figuring out how this process works, in addition to things like your website. And I interviewed for that club, and I will, looking back now, that interview was about as intense as some of the investment banking interviews I had. So eventually
Did you know it was going to be as intense when you interviewed for that club? Did it have a reputation before you?
It did, but after having been on the other side, I realized it was purposely more intense. I was a junior. I was supposed to, like you said, I was at a state school. I was supposed to go in freshman year and say, I want to be an investment banker, and that's all I want. Now I'm a junior, and they're saying, we have 3 months to get you ready for interviews. You better know everything. So, I mean, I'm talking kids asking me technical questions, behavioral questions, and then one kid in the middle of the room would lob, like a multiplication question at me at the same time. And that was the other thing. It was all peers. It was people with full-time offers already, interned already. There was about 12 of them. The professor's in the back of the room not saying a word. He actually kind of almost apologized to me after, like, yeah, you just got roasted.
And so it sounds like you got in though. So even though you got roasted and you felt like maybe you didn't do as well, did you stumble at certain points during that?
Yeah, definitely. It kind of was the matter of over preparation, which in general I think is key. Right before this chat with you, I pulled back up my old investment banking kind of interview file. It's a 200-page document. Like everyone I've spoken to, the conversations we had, dumb little stuff like notes to myself reminding me how to calendarize something. So everything I did, I was just so over prepared, because you got one interview, you didn't know if that was your only shot you were ever going to get. At least for me, this wasn't, I'm not going through the full recruiting cycle on campus, and we could talk more about that later, but where 10 banks are coming in, and I didn't get the top 2 choices, but I got all these other ones. So I prepared like every interview, like it was my only chance I was going to get. So when an interview like this came up that was intense, sure, definitely some stumbles and some,
But even like even this internal peer group club, you knew this was like kind of your one shot was to get into this club.
I thought so. I wouldn't have given up at that point, but it was just huge to get into this club. The club it was a club and a class. It included a weekly component that was really just a class, a finance class,
Is this the
and then
investment banking industry scholars, that one?
yep,
Okay,
yep. So
cool.
there's every university, or not everyone, but a lot of these universities have smaller programs now.
Yeah.
I've talked to kids at Penn State and things like that, or similar schools that have a club like that. But
Hmm.
yeah, this was huge. So getting in on my own would have just definitely been a further grind.
For sure. Especially they're like, why aren't you in that club? You
Yeah,
know?
exactly.
So tell me, like, how many people were in that club? What was the success rate of people kind of going through that meat grinder that you did? Was it like a very low acceptance rate into that, or was it high demand, or just you had to kind of be in the know?
Yeah, so just general numbers, I would say. And again, another part about it that was helpful was just the camaraderie. If I was just studying for these interviews by myself, it's just that's tough. So there was, call it 10 to 15, maybe I think there was like 12 in my class. The
Right.
class fluctuated plus or minus. I'll speak around numbers because I don't want to kind of put my school too much on blast here. Um, but I would say so I graduated college 2014. The couple years before me, ASU was lucky if one or two kids a year got a true, investment banking offer in New York.
Okay.
Sometimes we'd send someone to sales and trading, sometimes private wealth, sometimes into Utah or regional branch, but it wasn't even every year.
Right.
And then the year before me, there was a couple more. And then my class, I came out with, I think, four or five of us in
Wow.
my class, and they've been doing well since. The classes underneath us have all been more consistent since. Once you get the base, as any small state school knows,
Yep.
you have more people you can call on, more recognition. And I think this is a kind of I'm not an HR, but I think this is a broader statement. But I do think, and no disrespect to the brand name schools, but I do think HR is willing to take a risk, or VPs and people are willing to take a little bit more of a risk on some state school people now, because so there's a point where some groups you'd have 6 of the 7 analysts from the same school sometimes,
Right.
and now they're willing to say, okay, well, if we have 5 from these elite well-known brands, and they're all at the same 2 schools the MDs went to, we can take a chance on a state school kid or two who's going to just grind and try to prove himself.
Yeah,
um,
it's interesting. It's definitely a trend. I think the net has gotten much wider in terms of the target schools that the banks are willing to recruit at, and so you do see a lot more diversity across the analyst class in terms of school. So and I think also part of it is that the banks are very cognizant of the fact that there's a lot of people coming to banking just looking to exit right away,
mhm.
and maybe they get the sense that the state school kids will be so grateful and thankful and want to prove themselves that they'll stick around. I don't think that's necessarily that true, but maybe anecdotally, there's a slightly higher chance they stick around for a third year or an associate year.
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked. It's good for everyone. I mean, in anything, it's good to see more people coming in for more places like this. So it's exciting, and I'm excited for kids coming in now.
For sure. So, okay, so it sounds like your year was kind of a breakout year. Tell me a little bit. So you was that sophomore kind of a broad program? By the way, where'd you go? Just curious.
I went to Rome for a semester. So
Uh,
yeah, not the
Hard
best
life.
pitch. Yeah, exactly. Not the best pitch for. My whole story is about grinding and telling these kids to just buckle down. And I'm like, well, so I wanted to study abroad, and I wanted to go for a full semester, and I wanted to go to Rome, and I wanted to go a little bit non-traditional. I went second semester because I didn't want to mess up my football season. I wanted to be there for football season first semester. So I did base a lot of decisions about that my sophomore year, and then junior year was time to crank and get the offer as early as possible.
But was it in retrospect? Was it something where you knew about investment banking sophomore year and you just made that decision? Hey, I'm going to enjoy my sophomore year and not worry about it till next year, or what was it? Was it more like you got back on campus and said, "Wait a second, I do want this investment bank"?
A little bit of the latter. It was still like it was up there, but I was like, I was very naive. I was like, okay, I'm smart and I work hard. I'm in finance. Maybe I'll try to do private wealth or investment banking or consulting, but didn't really know. And I should have, in retrospect, should have been grinding through case studies, but wasn't really sure at that point. So I
Sure.
interviewed when I was abroad. I remember I wrote down some notes before this interview. I didn't remember this until you brought up Rome. I was in a hostel in Budapest. The first time I'd ever stayed at a hostel, like $12 a night,
Yeah.
and they had free Wi-Fi because this was before I had 5G on my phone, and I had to log in and do an interview with like a small private wealth shop. And I had to like interview at this like hostel and was like checking in my email and like, what am I doing right now? Like, is this all worth it? Is this going to work out? So lucky I got the internship while I was abroad. So I came back from Rome with $0 basically. And
Mhm.
the next day I started my first finance internship.
While you were in school, during school.
No, so that was second semester. So that was the start of summer.
Summer, got
So
it. Okay,
second,
so that was your sophomore summer,
exactly.
which was important to have that actually lined up because if you had finished sophomore summer with nothing on your resume, you're kind of going into banking recruiting even more of an uphill battle. So that was huge that you landed.
Exactly.
Okay, so you do that over the summer. You come back junior year. You're kind of more refocused and saying, "Wait a second, I don't really want to do this private wealth management thing." I'm guessing, and you're
Hmm.
like, I really want to go over this banking thing." So is at that point, is that when you applied to that club, that Scholars Club?
Exactly. So I'm applying for the club. I'm reading everything.
I'm
It was
surprised they didn't just reject you outright. Why would they take somebody so late?
I'd kind of put in the work in terms of it's a small group of people who want to do this. So at that point, when I was interviewing, I'd met half the people in the club. I knew the professor. The professor knew I'd done well in my other finance classes. I talked to the classes before, the classes in there, and other kids wanting to apply. So it was known, and it was known that I wanted to get in.
You networked
And I was
internally, basically. You made friends, or you knew that you kind of knew the professors enough to kind of give yourself a shot.
exactly, and they'll look at juniors, but you need kind of an extenuating circumstance and a story to tell, and kind of that drive and to prove yourself there.
And
So
so,
it definitely helped.
but they still kind of busted your butt a little bit on that interview. They were throwing everything at you. But then the professor apologized, felt bad. And then do you think you performed well enough during it? Obviously you did, but were you surprised that you got accepted after kind of that really tough interview?
I don't think surprised. I'd say almost just like relieved. It was
Okay.
kind of like you prepped so hard for something, and I think I did deserve to be in. I thought, who knows once you're in. Right? Maybe I did get a bulge bracket investment banking offer. Maybe I didn't, but I
Mhm.
thought I could do well, and I thought this was kind of the hinge point. Um, so yeah, I remember being at an airport and getting the email and being like, okay, now you got to figure things out.
Now you got a shot. You got a better shot. Okay, so
Exactly.
you're in this program, but it's still now junior fall, right? And you're
Yep.
what's the game plan here? Are you just blasting emails over LinkedIn? What are the tools you're using? Are you hitting up every single alumni in sales and trading and banking? What's the path that this group uses? Are you making a trip out to New York? Tell me everything you guys did.
Yeah, definitely. So you're especially as a junior, you're kind of more on your own in terms of the networking. I don't know how the clubs change, but at least for me, it was kind of more like we'll give you the tools, make sure you're not making yourself look dumb or our school look dumb out there. Have a couple calls with the alumni first, but our network's not, or at least when I was there, network was not so much where it was like, okay, talk to this alum at this bank, they'll make sure you're in a good spot. It was kind of like talk to the alums first, figure out how an informational interview is so you don't sound dumb to someone who matters. So once I kind of did those, I was just reaching out to everyone, any connection I could find. Back then, some people where I wasn't as big on LinkedIn. I would basically do my, can't see me, but quote unquote, like creeping on LinkedIn, be like, okay, this person is from the West Coast. This person went to a state school, trying to find anything in our backgrounds that I could relate to, and then just guessing emails. Um,
Mm.
I mean, hundreds of emails, hundreds of calls. I have like just memories of being like, on spring break with my friends and pulling aside to go take a call. And I did go on spring break, but other than that, I mean, I was very much in the zone. That junior year was just kind of like in the car, I'm listening to podcasts about banking on my way to my finance class where I'm still sending emails, stepping outside of class to take calls. And then, yeah, eventually once I built up enough calls and meetings, I just came out to New York when I was, kind of at that time where it was like, hey, I've met enough people over the phone. I need to get in front of them or nothing's going to happen. And then even once I was here, I was still willing to meet anybody. I was talking with someone um, and at a coffee shop, he's like, hey, my girlfriend's actually about to swing by. Do you want to say hi to her too? And I'm like, what'd she do? Sure, I don't care. And then like by the end of this, he's like, yeah, you should meet. She was like, you should meet his roommate too. And she puts me in touch with his roommate. It was just anyone and everyone I could talk to. At the end of the day,
What do you think set you apart that they even wanted to introduce you to more people? Were you asking for that at the end? Like the typical, hey, do you have anybody else you think I should talk to?
I do. I was, and I think you should. I think I was. trying to say this, it's hard for listeners without knowing me for this to sound modest, but I think it was just something I was able to do well in terms of way where it wasn't so much. I've had so many calls where
You
it's
don't
like,
have to worry about modesty since people don't even know who you are. So just be honest. Why do you think you're able to kind of, because I think those informational interviews, there's something there that was, besides just putting in the work and getting those meetings in the first place. I think there's a lot of people that can do that and can kind of use some of the templates and get phone calls. But once you're on the phone, some people are great on the phone. Some people are really nervous and awkward on the phone. How do you suggest that young students kind of feel more comfortable? Just reps, just practice? Or is there a certain way to go about and hold yourself?
It's a great question, and definitely reps, but it also is just, and this is hard, but you have to think of it a conversation. Yes, if I called someone at a great bank and they're like, Brian, I want to give you an interview right now. Can you come in tomorrow? Great. That's the absolute best the conversation could go. But too many kids, I feel like, because I answer every email still, I get kids from like FSU who are like, you're also into state school, will you chat? And I'm like, sure. Some of my banking friends thought it was crazy. Like, you've got to say no to some of these kids, but everyone said yes to me. So, or not everyone, but like, enough people did. So I would just say I've had enough of those calls where it feels like whoever's calling me has the regimented 5 questions they want to ask, and that they read online, and they don't really change them. They don't really adapt to the conversation or the tone or the conversation we're having. And then at the end, they're like, and please let me know if there's anyone else I could speak with.
Right.
Okay. I'm probably not at that point.
It
but
feels like a formula.
Exactly. And no one wants that. I just would say, and the biggest thing we talk with, while we were at the desk, we would talk about this. You could just, someone working next to me could tell how well the conversation went based off how I responded. If we were talking about the weekend and I was talking about, living in New York and when they should come out for a networking trip, at the end of the call, I'd probably be like, hey, Sean's right behind me. Why don't you talk to Sean? But if they're asking these boring questions, like, kind of regimented, I feel like I'm just analyst 37B on their list. It's tough. So I just say adapt the conversation, be relaxed, be conversational, and ask them, hey. So I'm from the West Coast. If I'm talking to someone from the West Coast, be like, what was the transition like? I mean, you're having your first winter in New York. You're working 100 hours a week. You didn't know anyone. Did you figure out what neighborhood you wanted to live in? Like, how should I think about that when I'm scheduling a trip out there? What neighborhood should I stay in? That'll be most efficient. So things like that makes it you're a person.
Makes it a little bit less rote, less, just more like actual, you've given some thought into the specific person you're talking to rather than like, okay, I'm going to go through my 5 questions of tell me about the culture of XYZ bank and tell me about this. And people are like, oh gosh, not another one of these.
Exactly. That I already just kind of ranted about this, but this is my one mini rant, and you might disagree and other people might disagree, but one of my least favorite questions as like a first year, second year analyst is when someone who's just a couple years younger than me goes, what's your favorite deal? And it's like, dude, I've been on the desk for 6 weeks. I haven't slept in 4 days. My favorite deal is the one that's over. Like, I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell you. I think it's a great question for an MD. I think because if you get a right MD, like who's a nice guy and has done some cool stuff, they're going to tell you some, interesting stories about sprinting to catch the private jet and barely getting the documents in time. 6 months in or a year in, I don't know how. I mean, me personally, I don't want to talk on my off, quote unquote off time while I'm trying to help you about the specifics of a transaction. Maybe I'm just pessimistic about that, and I'm sure other people feel different ways. But.
No, if you're young, you want to talk about things that entertain that you enjoy. So, like you said, neighborhoods. Maybe you like certain restaurants or eating out at certain places, or you're a foodie, or maybe you like sports, or just trying to figure that out. I think is helpful.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I think that's a better way to connect potentially. You can still talk about the bank and the industry, but the more you can make it like an actual connection in terms of like potential friends, I think it's a much stronger connection.
Yeah, I agree. Or even just making me think in terms of like what surprised you when you hit the desk. Like, oh, that's a great question. Like, I'm now more interested than talking about an M&A transaction.
Fair. Okay. So let's go back to your story now. So you're basically doing something right. Sounds like you're making good connections. People are kind of introducing you to their girlfriends and their girlfriend's roommate and you basically did you set this trip up? So you had done enough legwork prior where how many meetings had you set up prior to the trip, and how many days kind of had you planned to be out there?
Ooh, good question. You're bringing me back. I'd say
Just because like
probably,
logistically, I think it's a really
yeah.
hard to do. So I'm curious, like, how did you stack your calendar and make it
hmm
work?
Yeah, and that's a good question. I've told alumni or students emailing this before, they think they'll come out on a weekend, um, because then maybe they get to enjoy New York some. They think the bankers will have more time. I've taken now dozens and dozens of coffee chats with kids on the other end of the table. I've maybe met one on the weekend. It was because it was like a friend of a friend from ASU, and I was already at the office. So I'd say don't plan your trip around the weekend or expect to meet people. I think I took full uh, work days out here, and I probably had, I'd say, like maybe 2 dozen people where it was like we had an explicit or implicit agreement where it was like, yeah, let me know when you're in town, kind of thing. Like
Okay,
we'd
so
already had that
20
conversation.
plus people.
Yeah, and then
Mhm.
you can't meet all of them, and some people get busy. And then once I was here, even people who hadn't agreed to meet me or hadn't responded to me yet, I was like, hey, I would park outside somewhere in like 30 Rock area or some atrium in FIDI and be like, hey, I'm outside your bank. If you need to grab a coffee, I'm like right here if you have like 10 minutes. I remember talking to someone who they were like, I'll give you my smoke break. he was he's like, I gotta smoke a cigarette in like 20 minutes. And it was like 10 o'clock at night. I was getting no other meeting. And I was like, yeah, sure. This guy just came down, smoked a cigarette. He was like, all right, clearly just burned out hard. And it was just like, what do you want to know, kid? But
Man, that's tough because it's like you're sitting there, especially if you don't smoke.
yeah, yeah,
You're
yeah,
like, it's
yeah,
like awkward.
exactly.
You're
Yeah.
like, yeah.
He's got a dead look in his eyes.
He's like dying, and he's like,
Yeah,
"What do you want to know? Don't keep me
exactly.
long." You're like, "You can just go to sleep." Sorry.
Yeah, exactly.
So tell me, so out of those 4 days, you had kind of 20 plus people who said they would meet with you. Around how many of those 20 would you say? I know you don't know the exact numbers, but like, did 10 actually meet up with you, or 12 or 15, and like the another three or four kind of last second?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd say at least half, maybe even more.
Hmm.
Um, Call it. I think I was averaging 4 or 5 meetings a day.
That's great.
Um, yeah, and just hustling all day, like going to the city in the morning, and then just like I said, if I sometimes I'd go 3 to 4 hours without a meeting. I would just be sitting there, and someone would cancel, and I'd email 3 people. Like it's embarrassing. I still have emails where it's like I'd email like 3 people, and be like, I'm outside your bank, and then like two would email back, and you're like, oh wait, never mind, I'm not. Like it was bad. um, so yeah, you want to be as structured as you can, but again, now having been on the other side of the desk, you know, you kind of understand. Like you could have a meeting with some kid and just never show up because your MD taps you on your shoulder and you leave your BlackBerry for 2 hours. So it's definitely chaos, but I'd say you want to have at least a double-digit number of meetings able
The
to
reason
meet with, in New York.
one of the reasons I ask you all these detailed questions about logistics is a
Yep.
little bit selfish because I have mentees through the Monkey to Millions podcast that I run, where
hmm
I mentor 4 kids that are in college trying to break in, and I have one guy who's going to New York planning a trip in April, and he already has a summer internship, so that's the beauty of it. He's not like trying to get in.
Nice.
He's really just actually wanting to talk to people in New York, and I'm trying to like coach him in terms of like the number of people he needs to have structured and the number of days. So this is actually really helpful
Nice.
data
Well,
point.
you must have a good mentor. Got the
Yeah.
offer already.
He got the offer. Yeah, all the kids I'm mentoring are super hard workers, so they're all gonna do great. But so back to this. So you're kind of meeting with all these people. Is this what ended up turning into kind of the connection at the Bulge Bracket Bank that ended up being kind of your foot in the door for a first round interview, or kind of what kind of came out of all of that work, all that legwork?
Yeah, and I actually hadn't thought of this in a long time, but I actually interviewed for an internship with the bank I eventually went to. A lot. I don't even think some of my friends know that, because obviously I was very bummed about it. Yep, I interviewed there, got to the final round,
But when was
and
that? Was that after all this? Like, so your trip to New York, did you like get thrown into anything then, or like right after that?
nothing. Right after then, I forget the timing, but I went with the kind of the right calendar in mind, where it was,
Mhm.
oh, let's pull you back. So then yeah, I hadn't really thought of this in a while, but yeah, that's a keep on grinding thing. clearly I didn't flame out where, I made it to the final round and I was kind of close enough.
Hmm.
Um, but that could have burned those connections, or they could have no interest. But I remember I just kept grinding, kept interviewing, kept networking. I think I came to New York another time, and then it was kind of very start of the senior year. Those people tapped me again, like, we actually don't have a lot of slots, but we're doing some full time direct hire interviews. So was good enough that second time. So it's just
So
keep persevering.
so tell me about, what did you do when you kind of struck out for that IB internship interview? Um, did you have backups? What were you thinking of in terms of, was it you, like you said, you were kind of talking to everybody, and I assume it wasn't
Yep.
just banking. You were kind of uh, willing to go wherever and take any sort of finance related internship. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I hate to rank them, but I'd say after going from like kind of bulge bracket in New York and not really having a lot of other fish in ponds where I was confident, I'd say
Mhm.
I'd almost just kind of work downstream. Like, oh, you were talking to some elite boutiques, well, talk to some of the smaller boutiques, and it was kind of like, and I was still having these conversations throughout, but it was
Yep.
kind of like follow up more. So I was talking to regional boutiques as well, all over the country.
Hmm.
Um, and then ended up with no investment banking offer I wanted. Basically, I think I had an unpaid internship in LA I could have gone to, which is I had no connection to LA, so I just lost a lot of money basically.
Yeah.
Living out there for summer, and it was a sector I wasn't very interested in. I could have stayed at the small boutique investment bank I was helping, where I was getting like no technical skills. I was basically just sourcing.
Yep.
Um, and then I had a good private wealth offer. And the offer I ended up taking was to go to one of the kind of best fund of funds. It was just a very good name, and I figured at that point I need the biggest name on my resume. I'm not going to gain enough skills at this local, and the situation can be different for kids. If you're at a local bank where you're just crushing deals and you're getting tombstones and you're building models, the answer might
Do
be
that.
for you to stay there.
Yeah.
But I knew that summer wouldn't look like that, so I wanted the biggest name I could, where they could go, okay, he
Yeah.
didn't get his.
I was just going to say that's a very interesting point, that you realized the actual experience you were going to be getting at these smaller banks weren't going to be like, you weren't going to have a bunch of transaction experience on your resume to
Mm-hmm,
speak of. So you just went for brand.
exactly.
You just went for brand to try and give yourself rep for full-time recruiting.
Exactly. It was a great offer, interesting team, interesting work, and I ended up getting more technicals there. Not really banking technicals, but more
Yeah.
technicals there than I would have at the local shop, and was able to, that story sold well, and it was also a little bit of a hedge because it was a great shop,
Hmm.
and they would have been willing to. It was a regional office, a good regional office,
Hmm.
but they would have been willing to try to help me into their New York office after. So that was kind of a hedge as well.
Okay, great. So you didn't get, so were you, in terms of your IB internship, before we kind of move on to the senior year, were you actually, did you get a lot of interviews out of all that legwork? I know you said you got one. Did you get any others where you like made it to final rounds, or was all that work for like one interview, one first round interview?
Yeah, it's kind of depressing and a little bit scary, but there were I think I had some other phone interviews, but not any final rounds or getting called into New York offices like I wanted.
Okay.
Some quasi interviews, some first round phone screens.
Was that a
But
wake up? Was that like a wake up call to you? Were you shocked
oh
at
yeah,
all that
oh
legwork?
it was definitely scary. I remember I thought I was crushing it at this elite boutique, really good shop, really good team. Everyone was so nice. I talked to like 5 or 6 people, and then kind of right before interviews, this guy just looks at me and is like, "Hey, like at the end of the day, the kids who get the interview are the ones who have someone pound the loudest on the table for you." And I'm gonna be honest, I'm not that guy, and you didn't go to my school, kind of thing, and I'm not going to be that guy. It was kind of essentially different, not really much different words. That's basically what he said, is like, hey, like you said, kind of like, all this is for naught. You're not going to be getting an interview with us. And it's just like, oh my gosh, 5 or 6 phone calls, 3 or 4 coffee chats, really networking my way into the group to be like, oh, you're not even gonna give me a shot. So it's definitely a wake up call, and it definitely shows that
I'm
all you need is
surprised.
one
I'm
chance.
surprised they didn't even give you a shot, like to
Yeah,
interview a first round.
yeah, I was a little bummed. It's
If you
really
were
one of the
if you were
top.
my if you were my mentee, I would have told you to stop being so picky with the elite boutiques and the bulge brackets.
And no, I'm maybe focused on the terminology, but I talk to everyone.
Okay, okay. But I'm
I've talked
surprised you
to,
didn't get any middle market kind of New York bites. Maybe just because you weren't there, so it was tough with just the 2 trips to get enough traction.
that might be true. Some of the phone screens were more like I was talking to people literally Minnesota, Wisconsin. I was talking to everyone, but
Yeah,
maybe I didn't spend enough time on kind
yeah.
of some of the lower middle market shops in New York, which I did in San Fran and was able to get some traction there. But I really was focused on New
On New
York.
York, yeah, because if you're able to really have some introspection and see where you are relative to your thing. So like you did all that work at that elite boutique, and yet still you didn't even get a first round interview. I think
Hmm.
if you had had that perspective going in, you might have been a lot more aggressive with the middle market and regional places just to try and get into a shop that
Hmm.
had that would have given you summer analyst experience that had some sort of deal transaction experience. Because I
A
think
100%.
I think that would have made you a little bit more competitive going to senior year. It all worked out, obviously,
Yeah.
and so that networking obviously paid off. I think long term because you were around the hoop, right? So you
Exactly.
got the brand name on your resume, you stayed around the hoop, and then come your senior year, why don't you go ahead and take it off from there? So what happened? Kind of what was the break?
Yeah, I mean, I was still doing the grind like I had been for really the last year, and you start getting nervous, but you can't really kind of doubt yourself. There's definitely like times where I'm like, do I need to start grinding and figuring out how consulting interviews go or something?
Right.
Which is kind of late for that at that point too. But just kind of kept at it. Then got the call, again over prep for all these interviews like I have been. Um, got came in, got through the first round, got through I thought I was kind of doing really well. I remember this guy was kind of kind of charismatic, out there personality. He
Mhm.
literally goes, I'm not going to name drop the Ivy League school, but he literally goes, I've been interviewing kids from so and so all day. Puts his feet up on his desk and he goes, talk to me. You're from ASU. Why are you here? And I was like, okay, I'm going to crush this. This is going to be fine. We're going to talk. So
Mhm.
that's kind of how the interviews were going. I was really excited. And then my final round interview was with the group head, a um, stoic Northern European gentleman. And I was just zero sense how the interview is going. And I'm like, this is my
Intimidating.
last, yeah, it was like the head boss. It was like no sense how this thing is going. And I just remember one of the last questions was like, all right, so if I give you an offer, what do you do? And I was like prepped for that. I just smiled, look at him. I was like, give me a pen, I'll sign right now. And he kind of chuckles.
Mhm.
So then I get the call as I'm leaving for the airport. Um, you know, we want you to come out for full time.
That's great.
So yeah, so that was early senior year, and that's my kind of advice for people. And it's funny for the listeners. Uh, Patrick actually emailed me about what was it 5 years ago?
5 years ago.
Yeah, he spoke to our club, and he actually found the email, and it was a whole amazing email. And I remember getting this advice. I don't know if I could have attributed it to you 5 years later, but yes,
Mhm.
he gave me the advice to go in and enjoy your senior year because life's about to be a lot different, and that was just so true. And that's my advice for everyone: get the offer, get the internship, get everything as early as you can. Because college is a lot of fun and you're meeting a lot of people who can still help you career wise down the road. You still got to go to class every once in a while and do extracurriculars, but it's a fun time. Go to your football games, get that offer, and study abroad if you can. Do everything you want because once you hit that desk full time, that is your responsibility. My job junior year was to get a job,
Mhm.
and then I got that and I was able to enjoy my senior year. And then once I got here and had that job, that's it. That my job was to do well. I didn't go to the gym. I didn't really work on extracurriculars or myself. I worked on going to the desk and catching up that first year.
Yeah, it's tough. I would love to hear a little bit about just in terms of what those first, few months were like, being the state school kid surrounded by a lot of target school kids. And was there like an extra motivation? Did you feel like you had something to prove? And then specifically, did you feel like you were behind at all? Or did you feel like you kind of belonged?
Great questions, all of it. So a couple different things. I would say, if anything, I felt more. I don't know if I felt behind, but maybe a little. And if anything, that was because of not having intern, not because of the state school thing.
Got it.
Um, so actually, there was a placement class, an accounting class, before we went to training. I
Hmm.
didn't even really realize I placed into, like, quote unquote, the A team. of the accounting team because I was a finance major. I took accounting classes. Some
Right.
of my peers that interned didn't take those accounting classes. Nothing against them or their school or their program. They just didn't have those accounting classes. They were taking econ maybe.
Right.
I had 3 accounting classes I took, so I didn't really feel behind in that sense. It was more the fact they spent 10 weeks there. They knew everybody. They knew how it worked.
Mm.
I didn't even know how to save up the proper format, how the right version up that they like to use in the group. They knew everything.
Right.
So I felt more behind in that aspect. So that was definitely a grind. And you're all working a million hours, so it's hard to be like, oh, well, I worked 100 hours this week and they worked 40, so I'm getting caught up faster. No, you're all grinding in there together. But I'd say the camaraderie is definitely good. There is something to be said about the state school kid around non-Ivies. That was very apparent, and I think that definitely did drive me. I handled it, I'd say, a little bit differently than my other ASU friends. My a good friend of mine, he'd already interned, so he
Mhm.
kind of walked around his bullpen like, yeah, what's up, I went to ASU. Without having interned and without really kind of having proven myself and known people, it was kind of more like, first couple months is more like kind of like
Like,
hiding it or hiding behind it, and then
put your
after
head
that
down.
first,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And then after that first year where I kind of proved myself and was, had mentors and, was respected by my peers, it's kind of like, yeah, what's up? I'm going back to ASU right now to visit alumni week. It's February. I'm gonna go golfing. Enjoy
Yeah.
your enjoy your East Coast weather. I had a good time at school.
That's funny. That's funny. I love it. So in terms of, so it sounds like, you were there for almost 3 years. Were you considering at any point kind of staying longer, getting direct associate promote, or at what point were you like, hey, maybe buy side's interesting to me?
Yeah, so it's tough for kids now because they just get the interview so early. My
Yeah.
advice is really just to kind of don't take an offer just to take an offer because you're miserable. Take an offer because it's what you're excited about and what you want to do. I don't know if you can know that after the first couple months. So it's tough, but you also don't want to get left behind. So I mean, I knew, I think people know pretty early on, about a year in, I was like, yeah, I'm not a career investment banker. I think I knew that beforehand, but this cements that. But I debated and went through everything. I went to um, hedge fund interviews. I interviewed at startups. I did interview at one point, about 2 year mark for anything and everything where I was like, I just need to get out of here. And then it was
Did
kind of
that
like,
did that hurt you? That kind of lack of, I'll say lack of focus, or with recruiters? Were you very specific with them, or did you kind of change your story depending on what recruiter you were talking to?
great question. So I actually was consistent with recruiters. So when I first went in,
Hmm.
all the recruiters I talked to, I said I wanted to go to a long short hedge fund in New York.
Okay.
So it was very focused. So that's all I was interviewing for the first couple months, because that's all. I like the stock market. I didn't know anything enough about the buy side to know where I wanted to fit. I didn't think I wanted to go to a PE buyout shop because I was on the other end of that, and I was like, well, if I'm not loving this here, am I going to love the other side of the table that much? So that's
Yeah,
kind of
so
all I knew.
that's you said something interesting. You said don't take an offer if you're just because you're miserable, but
Hmm.
take it if you're gonna love it. But I think it's really hard for kids, 22,
Hmm.
even if a year into your banking gig of like all you know is banking. So what is PE really like? I mean, it's very hard to know, I think, until you're in that seat. So is anything you could kind of just open their eyes a little bit in terms of what it's like? I mean, obviously
Yeah.
it depends day to day, but what type of person would like, private equity versus hedge fund? Do you have any perspective on that?
Yeah, it's tough. The reason I was interviewing for hedge funds was because I did like that analytical work. I liked kind of
Right.
um, following the market. I was doing that even in banking, and I was getting some traction. I wasn't crushing these interviews by any means, but I was getting um, case studies and going to second rounds. Hedge funds interviews are definitely a grind because it's not as kind of formal as the PE.
Yeah.
So I'm interviewing and I'm kind of, wading through the water here. And this is, my story was always that. And then it was kind of like that I wanted to go to the hedge fund. And I'm kind of taking a step back a year and a half, 2 years in, and I'm starting to get, just crushed. And it's kind of like, okay, I need to leave after my second year. That's what people do. I need to leave out, you know, looking for interesting startup gigs on this, or do I want to go to a buyout shop? And I never interviewed for a true buyout shop, only growth equity,
Hmm.
and even some VC, kind of smaller ones. Um,
Before you continue, you said you're getting crushed. Was this like 90-hour weeks consistently?
I would say plus.
Plus, wow.
Yeah, we definitely had some. I mean, I was on a pretty big transaction at one point, and it
Mhm.
was just kind of like, the 100-hour weeks was actually like a thing. Everyone's like, I worked 120-hour weeks every week. It wasn't like that, but yeah, it was. I remember I just told the story a couple weekends ago. We had some friends who didn't really kind of know what we were talking about when we're like we used to be really busy in banking. I was telling the story about how I thought I was going to meet my friends out, get a deck at 6 p.m. on a Friday and be like, oh, it's fine. I'll meet you guys after dinner. And then it's 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. And it's like, it's fine. I was 21, 22 years old. I was
Mhm.
like, yeah, I'll meet you guys at midnight. I don't care. Bars are open till 4 in New York. And it being
Right.
2 o'clock. And then looking down and it'd be 4:30 in the morning on a Friday night, being 22 years old and being like, I just worked till the bars closed and I have to come back in tomorrow morning. Like that's a tough realization. So when you're doing that, yeah, you're responding more to recruiters' emails outside of your interest zone. So that's kind of happening. But then I take a step back and start reading about what I really want to do. And it kind of came down to I think I would have really, really liked to work for a hedge fund for a
Mhm.
couple of years. I don't think just personality, temperate wise, I was going to be in it for 10, 15 years to be a PM of some fund.
Okay.
So I kind of thought about what I wanted to do long term. And that's more what I'm doing now is trying to start my own company or work for a really early stage startup.
Mhm.
Well, the path to do that's not really a hedge fund. It's not really a buyout shop. So I started reading more about growth equity. So
Mhm.
then I tell the in VC. I decided I didn't really want to do VC and I wasn't really willing to move to San Fran. So then I tell the recruiters I want a growth equity shop and I want it in New York. And then they're like, great. What about this hedge fund in Philly? Sometimes um, so, so it's tough sometimes. And I went back to networking mode. I wasn't really getting a lot of the opportunities I want. I was getting some interesting stuff.
Mhm.
Maybe it'd be a little bit too large, or maybe it'd be in San Fran, or maybe it was a sector I didn't like.
Mhm.
So then I just literally Googled best growth equity shops in New York. I mean, as you know, there's just not a ton. Most of those ones are more in San Fran,
Right.
or SF. So San Francisco listeners will shoot me for calling it San Fran. Uh,
Well, that's fine. And why were you so focused on staying in New York on the East Coast so young in your career, so early?
yeah, I really just fell in love with New York. I always wanted to get out here. I was born in California and assume I might go back out there eventually.
Yep.
San Francisco disenfranchised me a little bit. I kind of went out with the intention of being like, could you live here? And kind of being like, not really. I miss New York.
Mm.
So I was pretty set on that. If I was more miserable, 6 months prior when it was like, I'll take anything, and a PE shop in Miami made me an offer. It's at 23, 24. It's hard to say no to.
Yeah.
Um, but kind of just staying focused and looking for the right opportunity. Googled best growth equity shops, find this, email a
I
couple
wonder if
people
I
out.
wonder if WSO popped up for that search. Possibly. We'll see.
It might have. It honestly might have. I might have gone through one of your guys' lists.
Yeah.
Um, so I have a couple calls, and then this one guy was just, I'll never forget. He was just like, "Hey man, what's up? If you want advice or do you want a job?" And I was like, "What?" And he's like, I'm running our firm's hiring process for an associate right now. Like, I'll give you advice, but like, we're trying to hire someone like now." And he's like, I'm conducting the interviews like this week. So like, do you want to chat? And I was like, yeah. So on that spot, that became an interview, not like a phone interview. That was like an actual interview.
And what
At
was
the
he?
end of
What did he ask you?
it
Technicals?
was
Buyout, like
a
growth
little
equity
bit,
stuff.
but not too much. It was a technical or two to make sure I wasn't dumb kind of thing, not grilling me,
Yeah.
just kind of behavioral. Why do you really want growth equity? Do you
Mhm.
know what we do?
Right.
Behavioral, talk me through some deals, make sure I'd actually had some experience. It
Mhm.
was funny. You know how you're on the phone call, and I hope kind of I'm conveying my points well. You have a lot more experience with this, so I can tell that your audience connects with you. But it's hard to tell how a phone call is going sometimes, and I could just vividly picture this guy at the end of this phone call, him like groaning and slapping his head, like, oh, the kid did good. Now I got to squeeze him into this process. Like he'd already had the schedule made up. He'd already like submitted the resumes to like the partners of the fund, and he was just like, oh, I wanted this kid to kind of like bomb it, so like I didn't have to worry about it. He's like, all right, man. It was Friday afternoon. He was like, okay, I gotta talk to everyone. Let me get back to you. He was like stressed about it,
He's like, "Oh
and that
God, you're making my life harder."
exactly. He's like, oh
But you were
god.
ready.
But
And how far along was this at your bulge bracket analyst? Were you 2.5 years in at this point?
Oh yeah, so I should mention that. That
Yeah.
was right around the 3 years. So I was kind of an early promote to associate, which was kind of just what the banks were doing at that time.
Yeah.
I wouldn't. It was going well though. My third year there was my best year.
Okay.
After 2 years in, you're better at your job, you're more efficient,
Hmm.
built up some cachet with people, and I personally, for the we're talking about exit ops, but for people who want to stay, I personally liked associate much more than being an analyst. It's
Hmm.
not for everyone. There's a lot of issues with it, but personally, I don't like fact set pools and graphs and charts and formatting. I like a little bit of reading equity research and strategic thinking, and and I like being a mentor. I like talking. I like talking to students, and I liked. I was kind of the guy who was supposed to run our internship class, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed it, and things were going better hours. And then I got this offer right after the kind of the promote and the full third year is over, but before I sign on the dot to get the associate bonus kind of thing.
Got it.
Um, so in between there, and then took 6 weeks off and kind of backpacked around Southeast Asia, and then decided, and then came back, and the next day was my day at the new firm where I did my 2 year program.
Wow. So well, obviously, let's go back to, so the guy did the call with you. He was like, "Oh man, I got to fit you into this process now, this growth
Hmm.
equity fund." And so was it like interviews the following week?
Yep, exactly. And I was actually back to being busy. I was put on a bake off at the time.
So how did you get
Um,
out? When did they do it? At night? On
yeah,
the weekend?
no, it was just late. It was late afternoon, and the only issue I had was I had to step out, and people kind of know. Everyone thinks they don't know, but everyone knows.
Everyone
But
knows.
yeah, but he actually had me meet the whole firm, and I didn't realize that. So I think they had their interviews all scheduled for Monday, and then like he had me come in Tuesday afternoon, and I didn't realize it was literally walk from office to office and interview with every single person. So I think I said I'd be out for like 90 minutes. I came back 2.5 hours later, and it's kind of like, at that point your VP is looking at you, and your analyst is sitting on his hands wondering what to do. I gave them work to do in the meantime, which definitely helps. But
Yeah.
you're kind of like, what can you do at this point? You're kind of going for it. And I still stayed, and I ended up being in the office till 2 or 3 that night. So just moving the hours later.
Yeah.
Um,
Is there a risk of doing that? Do you feel like are there some places, some banks that would just cut you, or you felt like your relationships were strong enough to withstand that? That
I felt like my relationships were strong enough, and you have to be smart about it. I cranked before and did the work that I could do while leaving work that things are going to progress. And I forget who was working with me at the time, but they were great. Where I felt like, okay, if I'm gone 2 hours, maybe 3 hours of work isn't done, but it's not going to be 60 minutes of work. There's going to be some progress here.
right.
So I
Okay.
felt a little bit more comfortable. Um, but yeah, it is definitely a risk at some places.
Fair. Yeah, I remember at Rothschild, I had to do all that, working 90+ hour weeks, somehow going out. I remember I had a hedge fund interview in like Connecticut. I had to take a train out at like 6 a.m. before,
No.
and I had completely like not even I'd slept like 4 hours or something, or 3 hours before the interview. I had to go out on a train, come back, then do a full day. It was just brutal.
How'd you do?
I didn't do very well. I think I made yeah, I think with the hedge fund stuff, I took hedge fund interviews as well. I just my pitches weren't polished enough, in terms of the long and the short pitches. Like I don't even think I had anything good. So like I quickly flamed out on most of the hedge fund interviews because I didn't even know how to prep. And I was much more prepared for the private equity interviews because just talking about my deal, talking about complex capital
Hmm.
structures. I worked in restructuring, so it was easier.
Oh, nice.
So I could kind of pull on those experiences to make a case. Um, but yeah, so this is cool. So you end up kind of getting the offer, and then did you quit like soon after? Because I mean, you basically had
Pretty
like,
aggressively.
yeah.
Pretty aggressively soon. It was kind of like I had a big project, the Bake Off, and it ended that. So I got the offer on like a Tuesday,
Hmm.
and the Bake Off was Thursday. And I was like, "Hey, look, like I'll do my 2 weeks, but like I already have my firm start date at the other firm, and you don't need me for. You're not going to staff me for a week." I literally listed out what was going on all my, because at that point you kind of have not just deals but kind of companies, and I was kind of listed out like no one's doing anything right now. This Bake Off is what I'm doing. That's why you put me on this Bake Off because I didn't have much going on before it. I will finish this thing strong. And I'll stay 2 weeks if you want me to, but
Yeah.
can we just make Friday my last day? I'll go out on a positive note and I can go on my trip a week earlier and I'll be happy. And they're like, so you're not staying till summer to help us with the interns? This was like March. I
Yeah.
was like, no, I'm sorry, guys.
Oh man.
I will say that though, you think so at the time I was nervous. I'd done the 3 full years and I thought I built up these good relationships, including, some important relationships with people I'm still in touch with.
Yeah.
Um, but and there's going to be analysts and associates much better than me that leave, and ones who weren't quite maybe as good as me. But regardless of how good you are, or how good you think you are, investment banking wheel keeps on turning, whether
Yeah.
you're there or not. Like I thought there was going to be a little bit of a delay, or a little bit of people being off. I came back for welcome drink or going away drinks for a good colleague 2 months later, which I never did again. It was just a really good friend left 2 months after me. So I
Yeah.
was like, oh, I'm going to go to this. I had enough people text me. I was like, I'm going to go to this. Some of the VPs didn't even acknowledge me in terms of, not that they were mad at me, but didn't even acknowledge that they hadn't seen me in too much. It was just like, oh, hey, Ryan. Like, they're just like, no one had even noticed,
No
you're
one
just like,
even like skipped a beat.
yeah, yeah. Like they're out there cranking to try to get home to their wives as soon as their husbands, as soon as they can. And they're just like, oh yeah, I haven't seen Ryan around the office in a while. It's like, no, he quit 2 months ago.
So tell me a little bit about what the jump to growth is. So you're working those crazy long hours. You jump. You're now kind of in a 2-year growth equity program. Tell me what growth equity is like. Less modeling, more modeling, more just tearing through sims every day. What was it like day to day?
Yeah, so I was really fortunate in some aspects and had a little bit of a different experience than some in other aspects. I would say not too many sims. We had a really good biz dev guy.
Mm-hmm.
So we basically I had to look at banker sent deals, but it was kind of like you're looking at it, poking holes in it, because we didn't want to do it anyway. We don't want a competitive process at the firm. We didn't at the firm I was at. We
Mm-hmm.
wanted, because you're paying a higher multiple. I'm
Yeah.
stealing this quote, I think, from our biz dev guy, but it was, by definition, if you win a competitive process, it's normally because you paid the most. So,
Right.
um, so we didn't want that. So it was a lot of him, and it also helped because I didn't have to do much biz dev. I did, some in the aspect that I wanted to or liked it, but it was really him churning and burning through deals and our partners bringing deals. So not a lot of sims, but I'd say reviewing a lot of decks and a lot of bad company models where they're sending stuff to us. I have to figure out how to digest it. But it was a great experience. I was fortunate my first year there. We closed 3 what I'll call platform deals, Series A. So you can kind of do the math on that, or the students can. And 3 of those, and then 1 or 2 follow-ons. So I had this first year where I learned a lot and I was busy and I got deals for the resume. But I also was like, I'm going to the gym now. I can go to dates on a weekend. Like, my
Yeah.
bosses are fine with me leaving early on a Friday. This is amazing. So
Mhm.
I really enjoyed the transition. The flip side, and what I left behind is I did take a pay cut. I was at a kind of a small growth equity shop, as opposed to going, friends going to a buyout shop who were still working late hours, but they took a pay increase. I took a pay decrease, but a huge lifestyle increase.
So let's talk about the pay from your analyst days all the way up through the growth equity shop. Can you give me a range in terms of? I mean, I think everyone knows the salary at Bulge brackets. What is it, 85 or 80 back then, or 75?
So when we signed the dot, it was 70. And then
70
it was like, I think while we were at training,
while
they
you
were
were
like,
there at Bump.
yeah, I think even at training, they're like, sorry, we're doing 85 now.
Oh wow, you're like, okay.
Yeah, great. So I've been pretty specific in this, so I'm going to be kind of vague on the
That's fine.
numbers here.
That's fine.
But I would say, if anything, my first year came in slightly less than what I would expect and what you would expect is kind of the average. Maybe I probably thought my first year I was probably in the middle, and I probably didn't end up in that middle range. And then by the time my third year, the bonus right before I left, that had grown to kind of the top for not just my group in that year, but kind of 4 third years at the bank.
Mm.
So some big growth there, to where it was a substantial sum, and you're looking at a very substantial sum you're leaving behind, because
Yeah.
I would have got an associate bonus and then the associate pay
Which
bump.
is how much associate bonus? Like the stub?
I It was like a signing bonus, so it wasn't huge.
Like 20,000,
Um,
25,000,
I
something like
I
that.
think that was about right.
Yeah.
And then you get some time off, you get a huge salary increase, and then the potential. I saw what my third year, I saw what my bonus could be and could be going forward.
Yeah. You're
So
talking
that went.
multiple 6 figures at some point. So like even well over 100,000 up to 200K for
For
associates.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
And I was already saying that, my hours are getting a little bit better. And I like the lifestyle a little bit better.
yeah.
But it was kind of the longer you stay, the longer you're, kind of sucked into that bonus. And people can ask about that or think about that too. But there's pluses and minuses. But I was ready to leave.
So
Um,
how big was the pay cut jumping to the growth equity shop? I know it's a smaller, it's a lower middle market shop. So my guess is salary was lower, or did they try to match in salary and just had less of a bonus?
I would say closer to that. I was so my advice to, and people will read this online, and people told me this before I started, but once you move to New York, you're young, it doesn't really matter what your salary is. It kind of just gets blown. You kind of end up blowing your salary, but just save your bonus.
Mm-hmm.
Just whatever your bonus is, park the entire thing into your Robinhood E-Trade account, into and then put the rest into your high yield savings, because your salary, you don't think your lifestyle is increasing, but all of a sudden you're like, well, I hope that check that used to be too big is now gone. So at that point I'd switched, and now I had this bigger salary. So it was like, okay, you need to start saving this salary, because the bonus that comes is not going to, refill all the coffers. So it was a much
Right.
lower amount, but it also takes some of the stress out, because, banking, you go in like, am I going to get zeroed out? Am I going to get five figures, or am I going to get six figures? That's pretty
Right. Yeah.
stressful.
Yeah.
It
You
was,
have
it
no
was
idea.
much, yeah, much lower beta in growth equity.
Got it. So you're there for a couple of years. What is it known kind of going to this that it's a 2-year program and out, or is it? What was your thought process in terms of next steps, and when did you start thinking about that? It sounds like you got some great experience in your first year. Ever consider business school, or were you kind of itching to do your own thing always?
Yeah, yeah, good question. So I have friends in business school now, and tons of friends who did it. It just wasn't right for me. I never really considered it. It was more kind of like I would talk to people to further rule it out. I'd love to take 2 years and go travel and meet a bunch of people and improve my network. At this point, it's very unlikely, and unless I do this startup that I'm working on, and then do another startup and do another startup, and all of them fail, and I'm like, okay, I need to reset somehow.
Yeah.
Uh, but at that point, you're going into pretty substantial debt for it. So I never really considered business school. I knew I wanted to go to a startup, but I wanted to go so early stage, where it was, the firm I was at, it was like, we're writing these checks for these companies that are, already valued in the tens of millions of dollars. The
Mhm.
equity piece I was getting, or could get at a company like that's not substantial enough. So I knew I wanted to kind of be seed or pre-seed, which is very early. So
Mhm.
I left with the intention of starting this business idea I had, while networking and consulting startups on the side, just being very cognizant of, you know, a lot of startups fail. This is a startup in the beverage space. I don't have beverage experience besides working on consumer deals. So,
Mhm.
kind of hedging that bet a little bit there. And when you're looking for a seed or pre-seed company, it's not like I just call up the recruiters. I'm doing research and networking and waiting for the right opportunity as well. So it's not, for the first time, I think I wrote a little LinkedIn post at the time. For the first time in my life, it was like I'm waking up and not really knowing what the next step is tomorrow, but it's exciting.
So you're looking for a company to kind of have that seed investment, and you're not looking to kind of start it from zero. You want something that's kind of started and an operator in place.
So that's my like hedge right now. Right now I'm full steam ahead, 100% working on my own company
Hmm.
that I'm trying to start. But yeah, if that were to kind of fall apart, I'd want to be the second, a co-founder, the third hire, the fourth guy who's the finance person that
Hmm.
helps them get that seed round and that Series A, as opposed to coming in and getting 10 bips of equity.
Got it.
I want a substantial piece in the next one, which is why I'm working on my own thing.
That's fair. How's it going?
It's going well. It's exciting. I mean, I was in research mode for so long, and
Hmm.
now it's like I'm incorporating. I'm picking which logo I want. I had a fiasco the other day because the bottle I sent to my guy may not work, and it's problem solving and challenges that you're not used to from
Hmm.
your prior life, like
Hmm.
trying to figure out the logistics of all this, working on designing a Shopify page. It's exciting. It's fun to move things forward.
That is cool. I want to see what it is once we're off this call. You can shoot me a link, but
This sounds good.
so tell me a little bit about like what's next for you. Just keep grinding with this, see what happens, kind of support yourself as a kind of freelance on the side while you're building this up, and then kind of take uh just take what comes and see how it all kind of where the pieces fall in a couple of years.
Exactly. So the plan now is to, I have a couple landmarks with this idea I'm talking about, in terms of like basically bottles are sold. there's leaps and bounds you have to make with minimum bottle orders. So I need to show some progress, realize I have some traction, realize I have an audience, or
Mhm.
kill this idea as soon as possible.
Right.
Fail fast if I'm going to fail.
Mhm.
So if I'm hitting milestones and making progress and growing, then keep at this for a while and see what happens. If I'm not, I need to be smart enough to kill it quick. Then I'll probably go lay on a beach for somewhere for a week, and then I will, because like we talked about, I save those bonuses.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's important, and it is scary not to have a W-2 anymore, but there's a little bit of freelance income coming in every once in a while. It's kind of, I'm not chasing it right now because I am working on this idea
Yep.
full time.
Yep.
But as it comes in, if I could take on a model, we have that background now where it's easy to knock out.
Very cool.
So then if that all, like I said, if I'm on that beach and trying to figure out next steps, I would just have to find a company that I'm excited about. I'd take the 2-3 months, whatever it takes, to find somewhere where I'm employee number 4 at this cool sports gambling startup, and they need that finance guy, and it's in New York. And,
Mhm.
maybe that perfect opportunity that checks 10 of the 10 boxes isn't out there, but I need to check enough of those boxes that I'm excited to, kind of hop out of bed every day and have a piece of equity in it.
So I totally agree. I think that makes a lot of sense. So tell me a little bit about, or if you could, before we call it, I think if you could look back and give advice to your younger self, maybe while you're at Arizona, what would you say? Would you have changed anything? Was there advice you'd give?
That's tough. Hmm.
I mean, it
I
seems like
went,
you've kind of done what you wanted to do and succeeded. So
yeah. I've had a lot of help along the way, so I'll say that, and I appreciate that. But I would say the biggest thing is just to keep grinding. If I did not getting that interview at that elite boutique didn't matter, because it did matter, but I wasn't upset because I did everything I could. So
Mhm.
don't ever leave anything on the table. I went into every interview with the mindset that if I don't get this, if I don't move on, it's not because I didn't do enough. Maybe something out of my control, but I wanted to walk in like it was almost like they made a mistake if they didn't give me an offer. And to do that, you just have to be overly prepared. And not that I was, I'm not saying I'm always the best candidate who walked into every room, but I think you need to have that mindset while also being humble, to get an offer. You can't walk in and tell them you're the best candidate in every room, but you need to be confident and poised with your preparation. That's, I guess, my biggest thing was just, I don't think I got that internship junior year because I wasn't confident. I walked in, I was probably trembling. I was probably so nervous. So then I, took the time and prepped. I literally made a list of questions, of every question I didn't want to be asked,
Mhm.
and wrote out a response to it. So I prepped those so much that I almost wanted to be asked them. So
Yeah.
if that's your mindset and you're prepping like that, then for everyone listening, you're going to be okay. Things are going to work out. It's scary, and the unknown sucks, especially for type A driven people like are on your site and listening to this podcast.
Mhm.
But if you grind and prepare like that, things are going to work out well. So that's what I tell my younger self, is to don't be so don't be so nervous. Things work out if you keep this up.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think prep can kind of build that confidence. And I think a lot of people kind of do a couple mock interviews and practice with their friends, and they go in and then they get blown out, and they're nervous and they're not really ready for prime time
Hmm.
until they've done like 10 interviews. And sometimes then it's the problem is, they've missed their shot. But if they keep grinding,
Hmm.
keep networking, they can get back, they can get another shot if they stay around the hoop. Um,
Exactly. I like that.
yeah. So awesome, man. I think we'll end it there. Thanks so much
Uh,
for taking the time.
Thanks for taking the time. I know I ran a little long there, but just
No,
kind
it's
of
great.
exploding these state school thoughts I've had building for a while. So I appreciate the opportunity, and appreciate your site for helping people like us get on.
It was a lot of fun. Thanks so much.
And thanks to you, my listeners at Wall Street Oasis. If you have any suggestions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to send them my way, Patrick at wallstreetoasis.com. And until next time.